How I grew up was this. So my parents were both deaf. And I mean deaf or deaf, sign language, the whole bit. No reading, no writing. The first time I heard most those songs we all sing our children, I don't even know what they're called. They're not nursery rhymes, whatever those songs are. The first time I heard most of those songs was listening to my wife sing them to our children when they were born. I mean, that's how I grew up. So when I went away to college, I actually took some sign language classes. So because I wanted to be closer to my parents. So I became the only person in my family who could really have a legit, in his own language, conversation with my dad. And we became close. I was also the first son that got married. We became close. I was also the first son who had a child. We became close because he's being a grandfather for all this stuff. And so every year my parents would go down to Florida like many people do. And they wanted desperately for my wife and our new little, baby Liz, who's almost 2. You got to bring her down. You got to bring her down. You got to bring her down. When we got there and we see this guy from a distance in the dark, it's about 8 o'clock at night under the willow tree. And I say, I bet you that's my dad, standing there waiting so he can wave us down. Somehow he picks us out from a great distance, waves at us instead of all these other cars to tell us to turn. We turn. He puts his head in the car, tells us what parking space to park at, turns to Liz, who's 22 months old, sitting in the back, and makes some kind of funny noise or face. The two of them laugh. I drive down to park, and then I get out, and I go to shake my dad's hand, and a car came, literally as our fingertips were touching, and carried him some 60 yards down the road and killed him. So for me, it was crisis mode. And the police came and we put him in an ambulance. We got to the hospital and they told us he was going to be gone. We just need to unplug some machines. So at that point, they called the religious person in the area. This guy happened to be a Baptist minister, and he comes in, and my father's Catholic, so he performs the last rites for my father. And then he gives me a big hug, tells me, it's such and such a church. If you ever need anything, son, we're here for you. To back up a little bit, when I was in my early teens, I was sexually abused, and alcohol was a big part of that. So I had been drinking since I was 13 or 14 years old, pretty much on the daily. I mean, really, really. And because it was used as part of the abuse, for me, alcohol was like a medication, right? It was this thing that kept me alive. It kept me from thinking about what had happened to me. After my dad died, that was an image, like, I imagine it's like being at war, right? And seeing your friends and comrades fall but this is my dad, and it was as violent as you could imagine. And so alcohol went from being medication to being poison. And within a year, my beautiful wife, who I'm still married to after 35 years together, 28 years married coming up, served me with a restraining order. And I had to leave. I wind up going to a rehab in Florida, in the town where my dad was killed. You go about 30 days and they start to let you leave to go to things like church. And after 30 days of being in a rehab, even if you're not a church-going guy, you'll go to a church. So I decided, hey, I know a church down here. That guy who gave the last rites and gave me the hug, I'm going to go to his church. So I got permission to take 2 of the younger guys with me. I was about 30 at the time. I'll take 2 of the younger guys with me, and we took a cab and went to this guy's church. Pastor recognized me from a year earlier, knew who I was, and in comes this older gentleman named Walter, and he says to the pastor, hey, pastor, why don't we do that young men's Bible study we started up? Why don't we do that today? And the pastor, okay, let's do that, Walter. And Walter then tells us, 3 young men, this story about how when he was 18 years old, he accidentally killed a man with his car. Accidentally killed a man. And Walter says in his story that his pastor drug him to meet the widow. and he's in the widow's house, and the pastor and the widow are planning the funeral, and they're talking about songs, and Walter says, oh, good. No, Walter, sit down. We're not done yet. And then they're talking about what verses that you want, and Walter's, oh, good. And, no, sit down, Walter. We're not done yet. Finally, they're done planning the funeral, and Walter says, good, I get to get out of here. And the pastor says, no, Walter, you haven't asked the widow why she wanted you here. All right, ma'am, why do you want me here? At this point in the story, and Walter's 80 if he's a day. I'm holding the man's hand. He's holding my hand. I know where the story's going, and he's telling it in this way that's just charming and funny and also whatever. And then he says, well, she said she wanted me to know she forgave me. And he turns to us and he says something like, boys, I don't know who you got to forgive or what you got to forgive, but you should forgive them. And I went back and whatever, and somebody at the rehab said, you know what you ought to do? These people, these horrible, horrible people, this rapist who raped you all those years, this drunk driver who killed your dad and sped off into the night, you know what you ought to do? You ought to forgive them. And they taught me to do this. For 2 weeks, every day, I prayed that God would make me want to forgive them. And then I prayed every day for 2 weeks to forgive them. And then I prayed the hardest thing. Every day for 2 weeks, I prayed generally, not specifically, because I'm not that big a person. I prayed good for them. And then the hate went away. And I can tell you, I wasn't saved before I went through all that. I remember during that time, I remember being in my little room at that rehab, like picture a really cheap motel room. And I remember just God's presence just being there while I was going through this process of letting go of the hate. And through that whole process in accepting God and in accepting that I had to forgive those people, I realized that I had to let God forgive me. And so many different things happened though when I was down there. I'm in an AA meeting, part of the rehab thing, and one of the guys in the AA meeting's a lawyer. He goes, well, you're not going by yourself. He comes with, I got a lawyer out of nowhere. It turns out he's like one of the fanciest, most expensive, and it was just one sort of extraordinary thing after another. But I can also say this too, I'm still married to the same wonderful woman who by every right should have left me. That's the way I feel God's love. My marriage is better than it's ever been. Even some of the work that I do now, I would not be able to do the way I do it if it wasn't for what I went through. So is it the warm, fuzzy, wonderful, life is great every minute of every day stuff? Nope, don't know who has that, don't know where that is. Picture the worst thing anyone's ever done to you in your entire life, okay? I've got that more than once. I was filled with just, you asked me before we started, the darkness, in some of the work that I do. I was filled with that darkness. I am not filled with that darkness anymore. That's the easiest way I can describe it. And it's not because of anything I did. I don't think God comes and brings Walters into everybody's life unless you pay attention and you realize when you look back, God brings Walters into everybody's life.